The morning I found the first trail cleared, I stood at the edge of it for a long time without moving. Cal stood beside me with his nose low and his tail making that slow, deliberate sweep he only does when something is close that he cannot yet see. And I remember thinking that the smell of the hemlock was very strong for May, the way it gets after rain. I had not walked that trail in months. I had told myself it needed work I had not had time for, and that was partly true, and partly something else I was not ready to name. The deadfall that had been blocking it since February, 3 or 4 good-sized limbs from the white ash at the bend, was gone. Moved neatly to the side of the path, stacked almost in the way a person who understood trail work would stack them. I want to be honest with you about what kind of person I am before I tell you the rest of this. I have spent most of my adult life maintaining things. Fences, culverts, mowing schedules, drainage ditches along county roads. For 11 years, I helped my wife Renata take care of a 12-acre memorial forest in the hill country of central Pennsylvania. And when she died the previous October, I kept doing what I had always done, because it was the only thing I knew how to do with my hands that did not feel like drowning. To understand why that stacked deadfall stopped me where I stood, you need to know what the forest was and what I had let it become in the months after she was gone. Renata had been the one who named the trails. That was her thing, and I had teased her about it for years in the easy way that married people find each other's habits, both ridiculous and entirely dear. She had 4 of them to work with across those 12 acres, and she gave each one a name based on what she could smell or hear at the point where it entered the trees. The first one, the main access path running north from the parking turnaround, she called the Cedar Walk, even though the cedars did not start until about 40 yards in. The second one cut east along the ridge, and she called it the Ridgetop Loop, which was accurate, if not very imaginative, and I told her so. The third was a narrow connector path through the hemlocks on the east boundary, and she called it the Green Corridor, which she was prouder of. The fourth, the one she loved best and walked most often, curved down the slope into a low, wet area where ferns came up thick in the spring, and she had named it Renata's Run in her own log in the way a person writes a private joke they expect no one else to read for some time. That log. 11 years of handwritten entries in a standard composition book, the kind with the black and white marbled cover. Trail conditions, deadfall cleared, drainage issues noted. The dates of first fern emergence and first wildflower, and first time each year she heard the wood thrush come back. She had kept 11 of those notebooks in sequence, and when she died, I put them in the filing cabinet in the shed beside the maintenance schedules and the foundation's contact information, and I closed the drawer, and I did not open it again until late May, which I will get to. The Halverson Memorial Forest had been established in 2007 by a small land trust in memory of a local family, and Renata had joined the volunteer maintenance committee at the very beginning. By the time she got sick, she was the only person who reliably showed up. The foundation had a volunteer coordinator named Miriam Oakes, who called every few months to check in and sent an annual thank you card, and there was a small stipend of $300 a year that neither Renata nor I had ever felt right spending, so it went into the maintenance supply account. When Renata passed, Miriam sent a card and flowers and a very kind voicemail, and I called her back 2 weeks later and told her I would continue in the role. I continued in the role the way a man in shock continues doing what his hands remember. Through November, I cleared the late-season debris and noted the dates in a new composition book. Through December and January, I checked drainage after the heavy snow and cut one small tree that had come down across the cedar walk. In February, a storm brought down the ash limbs on the green corridor, and I went out and looked at them, and I marked them in my log as requiring removal. And then I left them there. In March, I found a reason not to go back. In April, I found another reason. By the time I found the cleared trail in early May, I had not walked the Green Corridor or Renata's Run in 11 weeks. I had maintained the Cedar Walk and the Ridgetop Loop. I had done the drainage checks and the invasive species notes and the litter pickup near the parking turnaround. I had done everything I could reach without touching the two trails she had loved the most. I want you to understand that I knew what I was doing. I knew it the way you know when you have stopped opening a particular drawer or sitting in a particular chair. You build a small architecture of avoidance, and you maintain it the way you maintain everything else, with care and intention. And you tell yourself it is practical and not cowardice. There was a significant erosion channel developing on Renata's Run that I had noted in March and had not gone back to address. There was the ash deadfall on the Green Corridor. I knew both things. I was not neglecting them out of ignorance. Cal was 10 years old that spring, a big blue tick with a grey muzzle and a reputation for moving through the forest at a pace that suited him rather than me. He had been Renata's dog in the particular way that some animals choose a person without consulting the other people in the household, and after she died, he had transferred his slow, watchful attention to me in a way that I found both consoling and faintly accusatory. He came with me on every maintenance visit. He had his own patterns in the forest, and I had mine, and for 5 months we had avoided the same two trails without discussing it. The first morning I found the cleared deadfall, Cal had walked all the way to the trail entrance before I caught up to him. He had not done that since October. He stood at the opening of the Green Corridor with his nose down and his whole body reading whatever the air was carrying, and his tail was going in that slow sweep, and he did not show any of the signals that meant disturbance or threat. He looked, if I am being honest, the way he used to look when Renata was somewhere in the forest ahead of us, and he was sorting out exactly where. I stood behind him, and I looked at the stacked ash limbs. They were not thrown to the side. They were placed. The bark on the undersides had been resting on the path for 3 months, and the wood was soft and a little dark along the bottom where it had been in contact with the wet trail surface. But the pieces were up on the bank now, arranged against the slope with the cut ends facing the same direction, the way you place them when you want them to shed water and not rot too fast. Someone who knew trail maintenance had put them there. My first thought was that Miriam had sent a work crew without telling me. She had mentioned once the previous fall in a careful and kind way that the foundation board had discussed whether additional volunteer support might be helpful given the circumstances, and I had declined, also in a careful and kind way, meaning I had said thank you and changed the subject. So I called her that afternoon from the truck. "Miriam," I said when she picked up, "did you send anyone out to the forest this week?" She was quiet for a moment. "No," she said. "Why, is something wrong?" "No," I said. "I found some trail work done that I didn't do. Thought maybe the board had arranged it." Another pause. "I can ask around," she said. "Maybe someone from the old committee came by. Did they do it right?" I looked out the truck window at the tree line. "They did it right," I said. She said she would ask and let me know, and she called back 2 days later and said no one from the foundation had been out there. I thanked her and hung up, and I sat with that information for a while. I will tell you what I told myself. I told myself it had been a hiker, probably someone who used the forest regularly and had been bothered by the blocked path. The Green Corridor connected to a longer trail system on the adjacent property, and people did come through. Someone who knew what they were doing with deadfall, who happened to come through on a dry day with enough time to do it properly. It was a reasonable explanation, and I held on to it for about 3 weeks, until the second thing happened on Renata's Run. In late May, I went out to the forest on a Tuesday morning after a night of rain. The drainage situation on Renata's Run had been on my mind in the way that things we avoid still occupy us, humming at the back of ordinary days. The erosion channel I had marked in March ran across the trail at a low point in the path, about 60 feet into the run from the junction with the main cedar walk. When the water came down off the slope in a heavy rain, it cut across the trail surface and had been slowly washing out the bank on the low side, creating a little step and then a larger step each season. It went unaddressed. Renata had noted it in her log 3 years running as a priority for the following spring. What I found that Tuesday morning stopped me the way the deadfall had stopped me, but differently. The erosion channel had been graded, not repaired fully, not filled in with aggregate the way a proper fix would require, but the raw channel had been recontoured so the water would spread across the trail surface instead of concentrating and cutting, which is the first step in any trail erosion repair, and the step that keeps things from getting worse while you wait for better conditions to finish the job. Someone had moved earth, with hands by the look of it, no tool marks I could identify, just the soil shaped carefully along the low bank and the surface of the channel smoothed out and packed down. Cal was 10 yards ahead of me on the trail. He had his nose on the packed earth, and he was working it in that slow, thorough way he has, the way he tracks a scent, not because he is chasing anything, but because the information interests him. His tail was going. He was not alarmed. He looked up at me once, the way dogs will when they want you to register something they have registered, and then he went back to the earth. I stood there for a longer time than I stood at the ash limbs. I looked at the graded channel. I looked at the bank. I got down on one knee and I looked at the edge of the packed soil, and I tried to find a mark from a mattock or a Pulaski or a flat shovel, and I did not find one. The surface had been worked with something wider than any trail tool I owned and with a pressure I could not account for. My second rational explanation was that I had somehow done the work myself and forgotten it, the way grief sometimes makes a gap between what your hands do and what your mind records. I gave that explanation about 4 minutes before I let it go. I had not walked Renata's Run since March. I knew that. My third explanation was that some agency, a county conservation crew or a Boy Scout troop or a trail organization I did not know about, had done the work as a service project. I drove to the county planning office the following week and asked. Nobody had a permit for it. Nobody had a record of any crew working on that property. That was the end of my rational explanations, and I did not replace them with anything right away. I just drove home and fed Cal and sat on the porch for a while, and the thing that was true whether I named it or not. It was in that same week that I opened Renata's filing cabinet. I'm not sure what made me do it on that particular evening. I had come home from the planning office and I sat on the porch for a while, and then I went into the shed because there was a tarp that needed resecuring on the supply pallet, and I was in the shed and the filing cabinet was there, and I opened the drawer. I told myself I was looking for the maintenance schedule. The composition books were right there beside it, 11 of them in order, and the 12th, the one I had started keeping after she died, was on top of the stack. I took out the 11th book, which was Renata's last one. 11 years she had kept them. The 11th covered from January of that year to the previous September, the month before she went into the hospital for the last time. Her last entry was dated September the 17th. It was about the erosion channel on Renata's Run. She had written it in her ordinary way, matter-of-fact and precise, the way she wrote all of them. She noted the channel dimensions and the rate of degradation she estimated, and she wrote out the repair steps in order, including the initial grading, including the aggregate needed for the final fill, including the notation that the work would need to start before the ground froze to prevent a full washout by spring. And at the bottom of the entry, in the margin, She had written something she did not usually write in the log, something in a different hand than the rest. A slower hand, the way she wrote when she was tired. She had written, "Don't let the run go. It matters to come back to." I sat on the overturned bucket in the shed for a good long while after I read that. Cal found me eventually. He came in through the shed door and he put his head against my knee and he stayed there, and the evening light came in through the small window above the supply shelf, and I did not say anything, and he did not ask me to. If you have sat with something similar, you know what that kind of reading does to you. I am not going to try to describe it more than that. I will tell you that I went back to the forest 3 days later. I went in the evening, later than I usually went. It was early June by then, one of those cool, clear evenings in the Pennsylvania hills, when the sky holds the light until nearly 9, and the hemlocks on the east boundary go from green to almost black in the last half hour before dark. Cal came with me. I brought my pruning saw and my log notes, and I walked the cedar walk to the junction at the interior, which was the point where the cedar walk, the green corridor, the ridgetop loop, and Renata's run all met in a small clearing with a wooden bench Renata had asked the foundation to install in the first year. Cal went ahead of me down Renata's run about 30 yards and then came back and sat down at the junction, which he almost never did. He was a dog who moved, and when he stopped moving, it was worth paying attention to. I sat down on the bench and I looked at the trail openings around me, the 4 paths going out in their 4 directions, and the clearing had that particular quality of deep evening in a forest where the air is very still and the sounds that you expect to be there, the small birds, the settling of the canopy, are absent without explanation. The small birds had gone quiet. I noticed it when I sat down, and it took me a moment to identify what had changed. The way you notice when a refrigerator you have stopped hearing stops making its sound. The wrens and the nuthatches and the white-throated sparrow that had been calling through the late afternoon were gone. Not gradually, they had simply stopped. Cal was looking toward the east boundary, toward the hemlock stand, and his tail was going in that slow, deliberate sweep. I want to be clear that I did not feel afraid. I have been asked by the 1 or 2 people I have told any part of this to whether I was frightened, and the honest answer is no, not in the way they mean. I felt the way you feel when you are in a place where the ordinary measurements are briefly suspended when the forest is doing something you do not have a category for, and your body knows that before your mind does. I felt very still. My hands were in my lap and my feet were flat on the ground, and I was aware of my own breathing in a way I usually am not. It was not immediate. The hemlock stand is perhaps 50 yards from the trail junction. The light was coming low through the branches and the shadows were already deep under the hemlocks, and I watched that darkness without any particular intention for several minutes. Then I saw something move. It was in the peripheral register first, the way things present themselves when they are very large and very still, and you are meant to notice them rather than stumble across them. A shift of shadow that my eyes tried to assign to the wind and could not, because the air was entirely still. I turned my head toward it slowly, the way you turn toward a deer you do not want to startle, and I looked at the hemlock stand directly. It was standing inside the tree line. Not concealed, not pressed back into the darkness, but standing at the edge of the deep shadow in the way a person stands when they have come to a place to be present rather than to be hidden. It was large. I understood that immediately in the way you understand scale in a forest, when something does not fit the expected proportions. The hemlocks at that boundary were old growth, 40 and 50 feet, and whatever was there came close to the lower limbs. Dark, I want to say dark brown or near black in that light, but the light was almost gone, and I'm not confident of the colour. It was not moving. Cal stood up from his sitting position, and he took 3 steps toward the hemlock stand, and he stopped, and his tail went once, and then he came back, and he lay down beside the bench, beside my feet, the way he used to lie down beside the bench when Renata and I were both sitting on it, and the forest was ordinary. I did not move. I did not speak. I want to be very precise about what happened in the next few minutes, because I have gone over it a great many times, and I'm still careful about what I claim. The shape at the tree line moved, not away, not toward me. It moved along the edge of the hemlocks in the direction of Renata's run, and it moved with a deliberateness that had nothing hasty or alarmed in it. It moved the way someone moves when they know where they are going and have been there before and are not in a hurry. I tracked it with my eyes. It reached the entrance of Renata's run, and it stopped. It crouched down at the entrance to the trail. I could not see what it was doing precisely. The light was low and the hemlock shadows were deep, and my eyes are not young. But I could see that it was at the low place in the trail where the erosion channel had been graded, the place Renata had written about in September, the place where the final repair still needed doing, and it was working at the earth. It worked there for a time I did not try to measure. Cal lay still beside my feet and breathed. When it stood again, it stood fully and turned toward me, and I could see the shape of it against the last pale light above the hemlocks. It was looking in my direction. I do not know if it was looking at me specifically, and I will not claim more than what I could observe, but it was oriented toward me, and it was still, and it was not leaving yet. I thought of Renata's handwriting in the margin. Don't let the run go. I do not know what that creature was, or what it understood, or how it came to be in those 12 acres. I have thought about it from every angle I can reach, and I have not arrived at a satisfying answer. What I know is that it had been tending the trails I had stopped tending, and that the trail it had chosen to stand at in that last light was the one that bore her name, and that it had just done the work she had asked to have done. Then it turned back to the hemlocks, and it was gone. Not quickly, not crashing through the undergrowth the way a startled animal goes. It moved into the hemlock stand with the same deliberateness it had come out of it, and the shadows took it, and the birds came back. The white-throated sparrow started up first, then the wrens, and the normal evening sounds of the forest resumed around me the way water resumes its level when you lift your hand from the surface. I sat on the bench for a long time after that. Cal did not move from beside my feet until I stood to leave. I do not have a word for what I felt sitting there alone in that clearing after it went. I have been looking for one and I have not found it. It was not relief exactly, though something that had been rigid in my chest for months had gone loose. It was not joy, though there was something warm at the center of it. It was closer to the feeling you get when a piece of work you have been uncertain about turns out to be sound, when you put weight on a thing you built, and it holds. Something had been paid attention to. Something had been completed. I walked the entire length of Renata's run before I left the forest that evening, in the near dark with my flashlight on the ground ahead of me. Cal walked ahead and I walked behind. The erosion channel where the shape had crouched was fully repaired, not just graded as it had been before, but filled in along the cut bank with packed soil and leaf matter, shaped precisely the way Renata's notes described, the way she had written it out in her careful hand that September. I drove home. I fed Cal. I went inside and I found the 11th composition book on the kitchen table where I had left it, and I put it back in the filing cabinet, and then I took it out again and brought it inside and set it on the bookshelf where I could reach it. The next morning, I went back to the forest with my tools. I walked the green corridor from end to end. I cleared the smaller debris that had accumulated since, Whoever had moved the ash limbs, trimmed back the invasive shrubs at the junction with the adjacent trail, and repaired the two tread sections that had been softening from winter runoff. It took most of the morning. Cal walked the path ahead of me in the unhurried way he had before that fall, stopping to smell things, coming back to check on me, moving on. I walked Renata's run that afternoon. The repair at the erosion site was sound, as I had found it the evening before, and I did not need to redo it. I cleaned the drainage bar at the far end of the path and cleared the fern bed of the dead material from the previous year, and noted the dates of first emergence in my log. The ferns were already a foot high. She would have marked them 2 weeks earlier. She was always watching for them, but they were there. I called Miriam that evening. She answered on the second ring. "Dustin," she said, and there was a question in her voice. "I wanted to let you know," I said. "I've been back on all 4 trails. Everything's in order." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad," she said. "Are you doing all right?" I thought about how to answer that. "I think so," I said. "Getting there." "Good," she said. "Renata would be glad to know the run is being taken care of." I said, "Yeah." And we talked for a few minutes about the summer schedule and the Foundation's annual assessment, and she did not press further, and I did not explain further, and that was the right amount. In the weeks that followed, I found myself changing certain small habits. I began filling both cups when I made coffee in the morning, and then I stopped doing that deliberately after I noticed it was something I had been doing automatically and had then started doing on purpose. And on purpose was not the same thing. Some things are better left to the hands. I started sitting on the porch in the evenings again. I had not done that since October. Cal sat beside me the way he always used to, and we watched the light go down behind the ridge. And some evenings I did not think about anything in particular, which was new. October came back, as it does. The 1-year anniversary of Renata's death fell on a Saturday. I went to the forest in the morning with my tools and my logbook, and I walked all 4 trails. The leaf fall was beginning, the first heavy layer of red maple and tulip poplar on the cedar walk, the hemlocks on the east boundary still green and dense. Cal moved ahead of me through the forest with his nose working and his tail going at its own unhurried rhythm. I walked Renata's run last. The erosion channel from the low point in the path had not opened again over the summer, which I had not been sure it wouldn't. The ferns had died back for the season, but the bed was clear, and the soil looked good for spring. At the end of the run, I stopped and stood in the wet area where she had liked to come in May when everything came up at once, and I listened to the forest for a while. The Halverson Memorial Forest is 12 acres. It holds 4 named trails. It has been tended for most of its life by one woman whose handwriting I can still read in 11 composition books, whose name is on the path that curves down through the ferns. It is tended now by me, with assistance I have stopped trying to categorize. I carried Renata's 11th logbook in my jacket pocket that morning. At the wooden bench in the interior clearing, I sat down, and I opened it to the last entry and I read it once more in the October light. The same September words in her careful and then tired hand. And I was aware that I was not alone in the forest, in a way I could not account for and did not feel the need to. Cal lay down beside the bench in the dry leaves and closed his eyes. The forest held whatever the forest holds. I closed the book and put it in my pocket and picked up my tools, and we walked out.